Hello and welcome to Strat News Global, and welcome to the Gist, our signature show on foreign affairs and security and a lot else. This evening, we are looking at Germany. As you're aware, elections were held on Sunday. We have a Social Democrat Party that has come in, that is the leader by a slim 10 odd votes. And it seems the end of the Merkel legacy. Our guest tonight to talk about this is Padma Rao Sundarji, an old friend and colleague who's been well versed on Europe. She is a journalist. She's been with some of the leading German publications, including Der Spiegel. She was the South Asia bureau chief of Der Spiegel and speaks German and follows Europe closely. Padma, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Surya. It's wonderful to be here.
So, Padma, Angela Merkel's legacy, if you want to call it that, what does she leave behind, and what can we expect from the new man who could be Chancellor, Olaf Scholz?
Surya, this is going to be a tough act to follow for anyone because during her 16 years, 12 of which were in a coalition with the Social Democrats, Mrs. Merkel has tackled crisis after crisis and dealt with them effectively. She's come to be, she's known as a firefighter, more or less. And at the same time, she's managed to ensure stability to the German economy. There was a global financial crisis, Euro crisis, the Greek financial crisis. Then you had the wars in Libya and Syria, and then the face-off in Ukraine, etc. So all through that, she's managed to ensure the stability of Germany. That has lent enormously to her popularity. And even, the growth of the right wing in Germany. This was also one of the challenges that she faced. And that came about as a backlash to the refugee crisis,
Yeah.
from North Africa. Then you had relations with Trump that went frosty. Then you had the onset of the pandemic. And now this disastrous US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And also, of course, there with the withdrawal of the NATO troops. So for me personally, I admire the way that Chancellor Merkel has decided to allow the Syrian refugees in when in 2015, when most other European countries were hesitant, and even
It takes a
members
lot
of
of
her
courage,
own
yeah.
party. Exactly. And even members of her own party were slamming her. So she's known for that kind of political courage. And at the same time, she has the knack of balancing unpopular moves with more populist ones. She ended compulsory military service and laid the foundation for the eventual exit from nuclear and coal energy. And she's legalized same-sex marriages. She's introduced a national minimum wage and lots of other benefits. So overall, she was an extremely successful firefighter. She's also, of course, the country's first woman chancellor and the
Yeah.
first from the former GDR. And as far as her external image is concerned to all of us, and I think there's unanimous opinion across the world, even among her staunchest critics, that her modesty and her down to earthness and approachability are quite unmatched, and they'll be tough to follow. I've experienced that firsthand in several backgrounders with the German media and in small circles with her. And she is absolutely humility personified. Now, to come back to Mr. Olaf Scholz, who is the candidate, the chancellor candidate of the Social Democrats, he is likely to follow. In fact, he's very much of the same mold. He's known as a clean politician. He doesn't even own a house. He rents flats. He's led a very modest. He leads a very modest life. He's been a mayor. He's been in public life for a very long time, and he enjoys a level of cross-party. People like him across the party lines. So I think that was one of the big it was a very good idea of the SPD to float Olaf Scholz as the candidate, because also finally he's been in the coalition government with Chancellor Merkel. He's been the finance minister and the deputy chancellor. So people overall, when somebody's leaving office after 16 years, voters are unlikely to want to take a plunge into the unknown. So Olaf Scholz
Yeah.
will not be the unknown, and he's likely to enhance and fortify many of the existing policies.
So, what would you say are Germany's top three or four challenges ahead?
One thing is that digitization apparently has been very slow in Germany. Connectivity is very patchy, and for all its achievements, Germany is not as digitized and high tech as one would imagine, at least on the telecommunications and digital connectivity front. So, in fact, Dr. Merkel's opponents have often criticized her for not paying enough attention to infrastructural development within Germany. Then, on climate change, her government has been criticized. Initially, she used to be known as the climate chancellor, but her
Yeah.
government has been criticized criticized for the reforms being too slow on that front. So much so that even the German date for reducing greenhouse gas emissions had to be pushed to 2045 by a court order because, moves were not made quickly enough. And she's also faced flack from within the EU, from cash-strapped EU countries, because she combined rescue packages with expectations and demands placed on those countries themselves, and rightfully so, perhaps, to take responsibility for their own crises. Now, that move was very popular at home among her voters, since Germans are tired of being repeatedly called upon to pay for this and pay for that, and financial
Mhm.
messes created by other countries. So these will be challenges, but the immediate challenge right now, Surya, is the coalition building itself. Most young people, remember, have voted not for the SPD and for the CDU, but most young people have voted for the Greens and the Free Democrats. So, in fact, a survey, found that first-time voters voted overwhelmingly and surprisingly for the FDP, and but however, the Greens have a larger vote share. So the Greens are the third largest party, and so these two parties are being considered the kingmakers. One is ideologically closer to the second largest party, and one is ideologically closer to the first largest party, which is the SPD. So it's going to be interesting the coming weeks and months. And don't forget that in 2000, I think it was 2017, Chancellor Merkel required 5 months to form a coalition. So it took 5 months after an election to
I
put a
recall, yeah.
government in place. Yeah. So they'll have to first, after that, then we'll have to, come a consensus over a chancellor, and that'll be backed up by a secret ballot, which the president of Germany will call. And of course, in all likelihood, it is going to be Mr. Olaf Scholz, as you pointed out.
Interesting. Now let's get to the meat of our discussion. India, Germany. Germany lacks resonance in India. I mean, that's the feeling I get, compared to, say, the UK or France. Why is this so?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right, Surya. The first and most obvious thing, there are several reasons for this, is that both the United Kingdom and France have deep colonial roots and history across the world, including and especially in India. Consequently, these are countries whose familiarity and experience or in dealing with or negotiating with the Indian mindset, if you like, the Indian way of doing things, they're much deeper rooted than that of those of Germany. Secondly, Germany did have colonies, somewhere in the 17th century or something, and it had colonies scattered across the globe, particularly in Africa, and
Yeah.
like today's Namibia and Tanzania, but also in places far away like PNG, Togo, Cameroon, and all that. But it was simply overpowered over the years by other big colonial naval powers, and was, couldn't keep up to its colonies, hang on to its colonies for a length of time. So, other than academics and diplomats, what this has led to is that most ordinary Germans have no intimate or first-hand knowledge of India passed down through the generations, as is the
Mhm.
case in the UK or in France. Uh, they that of course that has changed, dramatically since the 70s, because Germans are inveterate travelers. They travel a lot, and in fact, more than 250,000 Germans emigrate, leave their own country every year to live somewhere else. So things are changing, yes, but there is that chasm that you described between India and Germany. And the also the other reason is language. All the other colonizing powers left their languages behind in the
Yeah.
countries they colonized, but Germany didn't do that. There's some traces of German history in Namibia, but that's insignificant. So this means that Germany, for all its excellence, has not been the chief destination of choice for Indian students, for instance, going
Yeah.
abroad, because the language of instruction till very recently was, primarily German,
German.
and it's not a very easy language to learn, even to converse in, let alone to take examinations or degrees in. And the greatest reason of all, I would say, Surya, is that in the post World War II world, the majority of Germans have shied away from establishing any new relationships based on their superiority, be it military
Okay.
superiority or economic superiority, for fear of it being seen as a new kind of invasion or imperialism, if you like, and
Mhm.
this has its roots now, of course, in the terrible history of World War II. So it's for the same reason, which is also so strongly embedded in the constitution of Germany, that has prevented them from putting boots on the ground, for instance, anywhere in
Mhm.
the world, unless under the umbrella of, say, the peacekeeping, the UN Blue Helmets or the NATO alliance or something else. That's also the reason why defense exports are always a very difficult subject, to
Yeah,
pass
absolutely.
through
Yeah.
German parliament. Yeah, and of course, Germany does not have an immigration, has not traditionally had an immigration policy. So that's another reason that has taken Indian students away more to the United States and Canada and all that. But again, all these things have seen significant changes, but there's a lot of work to be done on those fronts.
Mhm. In terms of how the German Foreign Office looks at India, is there an issue there? Do they have some problems with us? Um,
you know I it's not, I think, they could look at India, they could afford to look at India in greater detail and with greater interest, I would say. It's not that relations are not good. Relations are excellent. You have excellent trade relations, excellent economic relations, excellent academic relations. I mean, the IIT in Chennai was founded by a
yeah.
German, and
Mhm.
also, Siemens India is one of the oldest German industrial presences here. So re- the ties are, and academic ties are very, very deep and very old, but the fact remains that as far as Germany is concerned, China is its primary focus, point of focus in this part
Okay.
of the world, and the bottom line for that is that Germany and China are each other's largest trading partners. The trade volume in 2020 last year exceeded 100 billion US dollars. Now compare that to India, with which bilateral trade hovers at around 11 billion US dollars or so. So this Germany China relationship is something that dominates, and India is not, I mean, we're not poised to be looked at the way we want to be looked at by Germany, at least not in the immediate future, not as a, as such a strong trade and industrial partner as China is.
So, in recent days, has the perception of China changed? Is it seen as a threat uh, more than an
Yeah.
opportunity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's very interesting because when they, initially the whole policy, China policy, was dominated by something the Germans called Wandel durch Handel, which means change through trade. This was the motto that had determined Germany-China relations for decades. But again, even in China, Germany made the same mistake that many Western countries make, of somehow dreaming that a Western influence will prompt the birth of a democracy in that country. I mean, for the former Chancellor, SPD Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who's the predecessor of Chancellor Merkel, he was one of the most enthusiastic supporters of China, so much so that when he was in India, I remember he said to have pulled out and mistakenly started reading a speech that he had prepared for his next stop, which was China, in India. So, but jokes aside, China did come to Europe's aid during the global financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis. And German companies have been making huge profits through operations in China, naturally because of the cheap labor. So those kinds of CEOs have put their government under pressure to not speak negatively against China. So, but that began to change around 2016 because some top German firms were taken over by Chinese firms. These were German firms which no European company could afford to buy. And that's when the worry began to set in. And that was compounded by the fact that because of all this rail construction and the rapid, building up of the BR, the Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese goods began to arrive regularly by train from China all the way to German ports, and thereby also reducing the cost of transport, of hardware and such like. So even this chancellor designate appointed by Chancellor Merkel, Mr. Laschet, Armin Laschet, even he has spoken, he has supported deeper economic ties with China. But what is going to be the spoiler are the Greens. Anything that is so pro-China or pushes the Chinese relationship further is not going to receive the support of the Greens, because they've been very outspoken on Muslim camps in Xinjiang, for instance, Chinese surveillance against citizens, for instance, and all this. Because after all, Surya, this is Germany. This is the country which experienced the crimes of the Nazis and the
Yeah,
Stasi.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a
They
very
can't keep
sensitive
quiet.
point.
Yeah.
Exactly, they cannot afford to keep quiet, and the Greens are not keeping quiet. And then in 2019, there was a German Industrial Federation that began to publish warnings about China, saying that this is a systemic competitor and all that. And this was largely because the Chinese did not keep certain promises of opening up the China's markets to European goods. Now, the trouble is that many of these big companies, especially the car companies in Germany, they are aware of this. They're aware of all these human rights violations and things going on in China, but they don't want to say anything because they make huge
Yeah.
profits there.
Money
I mean,
talks.
money talks. I mean, a car company had to, in fact, issued an apology. Can you imagine this? Over an advertisement for one of its products, one of its cars, which had quoted a single line by the Dalai Lama. And they had to
Hmm.
immediately apologize to the government of China. So, I mean, even French President Emmanuel Macron, he has called for a tougher stand against China, but Germany has not played ball entirely because it's primarily afraid that it may have to pay an economic price. I mean,
Hmm.
for instance, when protests erupted in Hong Kong, and this whole Uyghur suppression, details of the suppression were emerging, that is when Chancellor Angela Merkel made her 12th trip to China with a business delegation. And she also dismissed critics, who have been, there are many critics even within her party who view Huawei, the Chinese telecom group, as a security risk, and they don't want it included in Germany's 5G network. But the German government did not really do much about it. So all these things indicate that, given this relationship of dependence on China, I think Germany is unlikely to go beyond lip service as far as containing China is concerned.
Hmm.
Intellectually in Germany, there's always heated debate. There's a lot of criticism, but that will not translate necessarily into policy. In fact, you had asked when we spoke earlier today, you'd asked, about the Indo-Pacific. So how does it then, excuse me, how does Germany then in that case view Quad or view
Yeah, yeah,
AUKUS,
absolutely.
which are
Coordinocus, yeah.
exactly, which are primarily China focused. I think it's for these very reasons that while Germany may certainly go along in matters pertaining to trade, investment, expanding business here, investment here, providing competition to the Belt and Road Initiative, which is already very much in the pipeline. It is not, it may even send a frigate, as it recently did, to the China seas as a token sign of solidarity with its Western allies. But it will do all this only as long as its involvement does not threaten or endanger its trade relationship with China in a detrimental kind of way. So even the SPD, I mean, even if Mr. Scholz comes in, and the SPD has called for critical dialogue with Beijing, and it has called out Chinese human rights abuses, but it really remains to be seen to what extent they'll walk the talk after forming a government.
So, what about AfPak, terrorism? Do we on the same page?
Well, yeah. So again, a very good question. I mean, this is, are we on the same page in Afghanistan too? Germany as part of the NATO somehow got engaged in this old and well-known, Western dream of establishing democracy. I mean, it's only now. I was speaking to some Germans the other day, on the heel of, in fact, during the elections at a gathering, and as a realization seems to be setting in now that in some countries like Afghanistan, this is simply not the right soil to plant Western style democracy. That's the exact
Okay,
description I received from these circles.
okay.
And at the same time, I must say that Germany is showing fantastic commitment, admirable commitment, as opposed to other countries, to take on about 60,000 Afghan refugees. And certainly all those who worked for Germany's various initiatives in Afghanistan, the Germans are committed to getting them out. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, there's also interesting, that it's only recently that the decalibration or the delinking of Pakistan with India, began. Again, this is, I must say, I'd like to pay a tribute here, particularly to the foreign offices of both both the countries, particularly the embassies, in that the wording on J&K has changed quite clearly, in documents
Mhm.
released by the German Foreign Office. There's been much talk of the disputed state and, that kind of thing, and all that has changed quite obviously. There's much greater pragmatism, vis-a-vis India in matters concerning cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, in matters concerning J&K, as I said, than there was in the 70s, or 80s. And I think, again, this is primarily due to an excellent line of ambassadors that Germany has sent to India, with the notable exception of a single gentleman. All of them have really understood nuance, and they've engaged with Indian governments, even with opposition politicians, which was unheard of in the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
Nobody ever bothered to do that. They've engaged with state governments, and they've kept up a steady stream of information to the Foreign Office in Berlin, and managed to bring about certain positive changes. And then, of course, they're all career diplomats, but many of them have been India scholars, Afghanistan and regional strategists, and some, like the current ambassador, with very deep cultural and personal links to India. So all this has certainly helped alter the picture of India within German government circles. But I have only one small thing I'd like to add, Surya, if I may. The public opinion in Germany on India is unfortunately not great, and this,
Mhm.
you can only blame the media, for you and me. I mean, people like us, and
Yeah.
in this case, the German media, that is responsible for public opinion, because after all, that is where the public gets its opinion
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
gets its information from. And that is in a sorry state as far as India is concerned. I mean, the media of Germany is very ill represented here, and consequently, India ends up being very ill represented in the German media. Then there is the corporate angle, of course. I've often wondered about that. After all, newspapers and media concerns are owned by many corporates who perhaps have interests in other countries like China.
Yeah.
So there's very little interest or no interest. That's the result, neither in the newsrooms in Germany nor amongst those who call themselves India South Asia correspondents. So this is China remains the hottest story, and most of them don't live here. Even they live, either in Bangkok or in Singapore, because it's a more comfortable life. And you can't really, I mean, that you're a seasoned journalist, Surya. You can't cover a country, through remote control, by sitting
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You have to be
and
there.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to be there. So they don't manage to go beyond the usual hard luck story, or the exotic story, or of course the horrible subject of rape, which is entirely justified. You must write about it, but
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
focus only on certain subjects is way over the top. And this is very different from my time with Der Spiegel, because I had an excellent editorial leadership at the time. So we were running stories every week. I was kept on my toes. I mean, we were even interviewing minor regional players, and not just hard luck stories or the usual imperialist exotica. So that is the state of affairs. Public opinion is not, I mean, not, there's no great public interest or great public opinion, but
Fascinating.
certainly
Mhm.
foreign offices have done a lot, both of them.
Fascinating. So, we are nearly at the end of our time. There is a question from Dinesh Kumar, one of our viewers. He says, "What is Germany's stand on a separate EU military? Denmark is opposing it. Germany can't afford to upset China. Let's leave that out. But Denmark is opposing it. Is Germany alone in this?"
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
It's about
What does Germany
a
stand
question
on?
from one of our viewers.
Yeah.
What does Germany stand on a separate EU military?
EU military, EU military. Well, I think it's a very fresh and new discussion. So time
Yeah.
will tell. One thing is for sure, that there are elements within the emerging coalition, for instance, the Greens, who certainly think that the whole relationship and the commitments made within the NATO should change, and there should be a greater focus on European, Europe-centric security. Because NATO has been sent out for operations which were primarily led by the United States,
Yeah.
as in
Yeah.
Afghanistan. So there is certainly a kind of a criticism of that role up to now within the NATO, and the discussion is very much alive and on. But it's early days yet, because they've only just withdrawn from Afghanistan, for instance, which was the first time actually that the Germans went out in an armed, avatar.
Yeah, yeah,
They've
yeah,
not
yeah.
done that since the Second World War. So I think that caution still prevails. So whether it's within Europe or not, while there may be a European defense force built up eventually, it's highly unlikely that it's going to start, making sort of strides into other continents, or
Mm-hmm.
under the auspices of other countries, whether they're allies or not. I think what they're looking for is more of a concentric Europe-centric policing force, or an army, which guards and safeguards their own interests, but within their own or on their own borders. That's primarily the concern. They don't want to be used, and they don't want their soldiers to be used and their armed forces to be used for operations primarily led by other countries, in countries in which they have no immediate
No
interests.
interest at all. Absolutely, absolutely. Padma, we are completely at the end of our time. Thank you very much. Europe is far more interesting than the newspapers make it out to be. And
Yeah, I
thanks to
know.
you. So we'll probably get back to this discussion on Germany some point, maybe a month or so from now, when you have a functioning government in
I
Berlin.
think it might be
Thanks very
around
much,
Christmas,
Padma.
Surya.
Pleasure talking to
Most
you.
welcome. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks. Bye bye.
And all of you out there who have come forward with your comments and suggestions, Dinesh Kumar, Sri Hari NS, thank you for your comments and suggestions. Glad to have you. And before I wind up, a quick small announcement. Do watch our promo on our ground report from Arunachal Pradesh called The Eastern Punch. It's a series beginning shortly. Do watch the promo at the end of this announcement. Thank you very much.
Dibang, Lohit, Subansiri, Siang, names unfamiliar to most of us, remote but vital valleys in Arunachal Pradesh along the China border. Watch in coming days only on Strat News Globally.